So, let's go. Number 1. The Nazca Tridactyl Mummies. In November of 2023, a small body lay on a table before the Congress of Peru, its 3 long fingers splayed under the lights, its skin chalk white and dusted with pale powder. Cameras crowded in. A journalist named Jaime Maussan raised the figure and told lawmakers it was not human. The room did not know whether to gasp or laugh. This is where the story arrives. It begins 6 years earlier and 1,000 kilometers away in the desert around Nazca. The specimens first surfaced in 2017. Maussan presented them through a project funded by a French entrepreneur named Thierry Jamin. The most complete body, nicknamed Maria, stands about 1.6 to 1.7 meters tall. It has 3 elongated fingers and 3 toes on each limb. Every specimen is coated in a white powder that turned out to be diatomaceous earth, a fine mineral dust often used to dry and preserve. That coating does something useful for a mystery. It makes clean dating harder. Reported radiocarbon results place the bodies at roughly 1,700 to 1,800 years old. That range overlaps the real Nazca culture, the people who cut the famous lines into this same desert. And that overlap is the point. The mummies wear an authentic disguise. Peru did not stay quiet. The Ministry of Culture and the Peruvian College of Archaeologists condemned the specimens as fabrications built from looted remains. In January of 2024, a forensic specialist named Flavio Estrada announced his conclusion plainly. The figures, he said, were dolls, assembled from paper, glue, metal, and bones, human and animal. They were not, in his words, extraterrestrials. Anatomists pointed out what was missing. A living 3-fingered hand would carry muscle attachment scars on the bone. These did not. Yet, the case refuses to close. Some specialists who examined a subset of the bodies claimed they found no assembly seams, and that crack is enough to keep the debate breathing. Maussan's team announced DNA results showing large fractions of unknown sequences, but nothing was ever published in a peer-reviewed journal. CT scans exist, and interpreters split down the middle, one side seeing manipulation, the other seeing coherence. The 2017 wave included smaller figures nicknamed Josefina and Albert, some with what looked like eggs tucked inside the body cavities. And there is a track record worth knowing. Maussan had promoted a supposed alien photograph in 2015, the so-called Roswell slides, which turned out to show the mummy of a human child. The cranial elongation on Maria, meanwhile, closely mimics the genuine artificial head shaping practiced by the real Paracas and Nazca peoples, the kind of authentic detail that makes a fabrication persuasive. There are 3 ways to read Maria. The mainstream reading is a manufactured hoax, full stop. A middle reading holds that real ancient bodies were taken and altered. The fringe reading insists on something non-human. What makes this the perfect opening case is the armor. Real mummies, a real region, real dating labs, all wrapped around a claim that no laboratory in the world will formally publish. Peru's own grave-robbing laws make the provenance unverifiable, which is exactly why academia will not touch it. And when proof is impossible, the story lives on the absence of proof. Hold that idea, because the next discovery survives the same way. Number 2. The Ica Stones. A farmer near the town of Ica pressed a dark, rounded cobble into a collector's palm, and cut into its polished face was a man riding a long-necked dinosaur. The buyer was a local doctor, and he could not stop buying. His name was Javier Cabrera Darquea, and before he was done, he had gathered more than 11,000 engraved stones and filled a private museum with them. The scenes on the stones are extraordinary. Humans hunt sauropods. Surgeons perform open-heart operations. There are telescopes and maps of lost continents. If genuine, the stones would rewrite everything. But a supplier named Basilio Ushuya confessed in the 1970s that he had carved many of them himself, using a dental drill and copying images out of comics and magazines. He baked and buried the stones to age them. Then Ushuya took it back. He said he had only claimed forgery to avoid being prosecuted for selling genuine antiquities, which is a serious crime in Peru. That recant is the engine of the whole mystery. It let believers reopen a case that skeptics considered shut. The stones themselves resist testing. They are andesite, a volcanic rock with no organic carbon, so radiocarbon dating cannot touch them. An engraved surface can be given a false patina with nothing more than shoe polish or a few months in the ground. And not one Ica stone has ever come out of a controlled, stratified excavation. Every single one arrived through a dealer. Cabrera built a whole theory around them. He imagined a lost race he called Glyptolithic man, a people who lived beside dinosaurs and recorded their medicine and astronomy in stone. The trouble is in the details. The dinosaurs on the stones drag their tails in the sand, exactly the way artists drew them in the middle of the 20th century, and exactly the way modern paleontology says they did not stand. The art matches the era of the forger, not the age of the dinosaurs. The stones themselves range from fist-sized river cobbles to boulders, all gray to black volcanic rock. Peruvian authorities investigated Ushuaia for trafficking antiquities, which is precisely why his forgery confession carried real legal weight, and why taking it back mattered so much. Erich von Däniken put the stones in his books, and creationists embraced them as proof that humans and dinosaurs walked together. In Ica, craftsmen still carve and sell fresh stones to tourists today. So there are three positions. Mainstream science calls it a settled hoax. Cabrera called it a genuine lost record. A softer fringe argues some original core is real, and the rest are copies. These stones are cousins of another human and dinosaur claim, the Acambaro clay figurines, but they are a separate case, with a separate forger. What matters is the lesson. A single impossible image, a person on a dinosaur, was enough to fund a mythology that outlived every debunking. The next object took that same impossible logic and carved it into a bowl. Number 3. The Fuente Magna Bowl. In a gold museum in La Paz, Bolivia, a heavy stone bowl sits under glass, and the inside of it is crawling with wedge-shaped marks that look, at a glance, like Mesopotamian cuneiform, carved 12,000 kilometers from where cuneiform belongs. A farm worker is said to have found it near Lake Titicaca, on an estate called Chua, sometime in the 1950s. The bowl carries two scripts. One resembles Proto-Sumerian cuneiform. The other is a set of Andean animal-style characters. A researcher named Clyde Winters, working with Bernardo Biados, published a reading of the cuneiform-like signs. He claimed the text names a goddess and gives instructions for offerings. To supporters, this is hard proof that people from the ancient Near East crossed an ocean and reached the high Andes. The problem is scale and silence. Sumerian cuneiform flourished between roughly 3000 and 2000 BCE in the rivers of Iraq. For a genuine Sumerian bowl to end up beside Lake Titicaca, a script would have had to travel 12,000 kilometers and leave absolutely no trace along the way. No second bowl, no tablets, no settlement, nothing between Mesopotamia and Bolivia, and the object has no chain of evidence. It was never excavated under controlled conditions. Different enthusiasts have compared the marks to Proto-Elamite, and even to the Berber scripts of North Africa, and none of them agree. No peer-reviewed study has established the age of the carving, or even whether the stone is local, and no thermoluminescence test has ever fixed a date. The dual script format is itself a red flag, because authentic artifacts almost never combine a Mesopotamian writing system and an Andean one on a single object. The bowl usually travels in a package with other alleged Old World inscriptions in the Americas, like the Bat Creek Stone in Tennessee. The real civilization of this region is Tiwanaku, which rose beside Lake Titicaca between about 500 and 1000 CE and built monuments that still stand. Diffusion theorists try to graft Mesopotamia onto Tiwanaku's achievement. Mainstream epigraphers read the bowl very differently, as pseudo-script or a modern pastiche of real signs, so the three readings line up. Mainstream sees a modern imitation, Diffusionists see transoceanic Sumerian contact. The fringe sees a lost universal language. One bowl is being asked to rewrite the entire contact history of a continent, and the academic silence around it gets read, by believers, as suppression. The next case was not met with silence. It was cut open on a workbench, and the whole world got to look inside. Number 4. The Coso Artifact. On February 13th, 1961, 3 rock collectors were hunting stones in the Coso Mountains near Olancha, California, when they picked up what looked like an ordinary geode. The next day, one of them, Mike Meixel, put a diamond saw through it, and inside the rock was a shaft of metal. They believed the nodule was 500,000 years old. Inside it, impossibly, was a machine. The finders ran a gem and mineral shop, and word spread fast. The cut revealed a ceramic cylinder wrapped around a metal shaft about 2 millimeters across, with a hexagonal outer sheath and traces of copper. To anyone primed for wonder, it looked like a spark plug that predated the human race by 500,000 years. Then the ordinary explanation arrived. The so-called geode was not volcanic at all. It was a concretion, a lump of hardened clay and iron oxide, and concretions can form around a modern object in a matter of decades if the chemistry is right. Members of the spark plug collectors of America looked at the shape and recognized it at once. It was a champion spark plug from the 1920s. In 1999, Pierre Stromberg and Paul Heinrich published a careful investigation in a Skeptics magazine and identified the exact model. The mechanical details sealed it. The hexagonal metal sleeve and the remnants of threading are diagnostic features of mass-produced hardware, the kind of shapes geology never makes on its own. The setting made the ordinary answer even more obvious. Olancha sits in the Owens Valley, mining country that has been prospected and driven across for over a century. A piece of early automotive hardware in that ground is not a miracle. It is litter. The original object's whereabouts became uncertain after the 1960s, which conveniently placed it beyond re-examination. Still, it lives on. Creationist writers filed it alongside the London hammer and the Austrian iron cube as an out-of-place artifact. So the 3 readings are simple. Mainstream science sees a misidentified spark plug. The out-of-place artifact camp sees ancient technology. A few skeptics even suspect a deliberate prank. Here is the hinge of the whole affair. An X-ray of the object showing the electrode inside, circulated for decades, while the detailed debunking that named the spark plug model was read by almost no one. That is the pattern to remember. The striking image outran the correction. This is the concretion illusion, where a wrapping of rock is mistaken for great age. The next artifact took that illusion one step further. It has no object at all. Number 5. The Dropa Stones. Picture a cave high in the Bayan Har Mountains on the border of China and Tibet. Small skeletons lying in the dark, and hundreds of stone discs stacked against the wall, each one drilled through the center and scored with a fine spiral groove. It is a haunting image. It is also a story with no surviving stone. The legend credits the discovery to a Professor Chipute in 1938. The discs, it says, sat beside the graves of a small-bodied people. Years later, in 1962, a Dr. Tsum Umnue supposedly decoded the spiral grooves and found a message, the record of a people called the Dropa who had crash-landed from the sky. There is a fatal problem. No verifiable record exists of Professor Chipute, of Dr. Tsum Umnui, or of the academic institutions they were said to belong to. The names appear to be invented. The tale reached the West through a Soviet magazine article in the 1960s, and then flowed into the ancient astronaut books of that era. In the 1990s, a writer named Hartwig Hausdorff repackaged it in a book he called The Chinese Roswell. No Dropa disc has ever been produced for independent study. The photographs that circulate show ordinary Chinese ritual objects called bai discs, which are genuine, common, and completely unrelated to any recorded message. Bai discs are Neolithic and later ring-shaped stones with a central hole. They are real archaeology, borrowed to prop up a fantasy. A pair of discs once claimed as Dropa Stones in a museum in Xi'an either vanished or were never verifiable in the first place. The story is clever in how it borrows. The small skeletons attach themselves to real cave burials in the region. The name Dropa echoes the real Tibetan Drokpa nomads. No Chinese archaeological bulletin from 1938 or 1962 records any of the alleged finds, which is exactly what you would expect if the events never happened. A skeptic named Brian Dunning traced the tale as it mutated from telling to telling, each version adding a vivid new detail and never a single source. So the three readings collapse into almost nothing solid. Mainstream researchers call it a fabricated legend. A gentle version says someone misfiled real bai discs. The fringe holds to suppressed alien contact. This is the purest banned discovery on the whole list because there is no object to ban. There is only a vacuum, and imagination keeps rushing in to fill it. The next case is the opposite. It is a real, solid rock, and it appears to show a footprint that should not be able to exist. Number 6. The Meister Print. At Antelope Spring, in Utah, in June of 1968, a rock collector named William Meister split a slab of shale and saw, pressed into the stone, the shape of a sandal, with a trilobite sitting in the heel. If that were truly a footprint, a person in shoes had stepped on an animal that died 500 million years ago. The rock is the Wheeler Shale, and it is Middle Cambrian, roughly 505 to 510 million years old. That is a world before land plants, before insects, before anything with feet ever walked out of the sea. The trilobite in the slab is a species called Elrathia kingi, one of the most common fossils on Earth, collected here by the thousands and sold in rock shops everywhere. Geologists who examined the specimen saw something far less dramatic. The Wheeler Shale is fissile. It splits into thin, flat sheets along natural plains, and when it breaks, it leaves a matching pair, a part and a counterpart. Those breaks routinely produce curved oblong shapes, and a mind looking for a shoe will find one. This particular break has no tread, no stitching, and none of the consistent depth a real footwear impression would leave. A paleontologist named William Lee Stokes examined it and found no genuine footprint anatomy at all. None of that slowed the claim. The Bible Science Association promoted the slab as evidence that humans predate the whole timeline of evolution. Similar human footprint claims in Cambrian rock have surfaced before, and not one has ever survived expert scrutiny. The trilobite in the heel is not a victim. It is simply one of the countless trilobites already inside the rock, sitting where the fracture happened to fall. No peer-reviewed paper has ever validated the specimen, so the readings divide the usual way. Mainstream geology sees a natural fracture. Young Earth writers see a human footprint. A few skeptics suspect a deliberate carving. What the Meister Print really shows is pareidolia written into stone. The same instinct that finds faces in clouds finds a shoe in a random break, and once it does, a 500 million year old animal becomes a murder victim. Keep this print in mind, because near the end of our list, a whole riverbed of footprints will make the very same claim. First, though, we go from a footprint in rock to a machine buried in coal. Number 7. The Wolfsegg iron, also called the Salzburg cube. In an Austrian foundry in 1885, a worker broke open a block of brown coal and a small iron cube fell out, a grooved lump of metal that seemed to have been machined and then sealed inside rock tens of millions of years old. The worker's name was recorded as Tridactyl at a foundry near the town of Wolfsegg. The object is modest in size. It measures about 67 millimeters across, weighs around 785 grams, and has a deep groove running around its middle. The coal it supposedly came from is tertiary in age, somewhere between 20 and 60 million years old. The cube went on display at a local museum and picked up the nickname the Salzburg cube. Decades later, in 1966 to 1967, the Natural History Museum in Vienna finally studied it, and the mystery began to shrink. The object is not a true cube. Its faces are irregular, and its metal contains no nickel, no chromium, and no cobalt. That last detail matters more than it sounds. Genuine iron from meteorites is rich in nickel, so the absence of nickel rules out the romantic idea that it fell from space. What is left is far more ordinary. Metallurgists concluded it is most likely cast iron, the kind used in mining machinery, or as a counterweight. The groove around it, once read as deliberate engineering, is easily explained as a seam from a casting mold, and the original object has since been lost, so only casts and old measurements survive. The earliest description of it, from an Austrian engineer named Adolf Gerlt in 1886, is already secondhand. There is also no stratigraphic documentation proving the iron was ever truly contemporaneous with the coal rather than pressed into it later, and mining and foundry sites shed iron scrap constantly. The cube entered the canon of impossible objects through the writer Charles Fort and later the ancient astronaut authors. The three readings follow the same shape as before. Mainstream science sees industrial cast iron. Early observers guessed a meteorite. The out-of-place artifact camp insists on an ancient machine. And here is the hinge. That one measurement, the missing nickel, quietly destroyed both the meteorite idea and the ancient tool idea at the same time. But it can never be fully settled, because the original is gone. A lost object freezes a debate forever on the side of mystery. You cannot retest what no longer exists. The next discovery has the opposite problem. It is completely real, fully studied, and still almost no one is taught about it. Number 8. The Oklo Natural Nuclear Reactors. In 1972, at a uranium enrichment plant in France, a physicist checked a shipment of ore from Gabon and found that some of it was already, impossibly, used up. A tiny fraction of its nuclear fuel was missing, as if a reactor had burned it. The reactor, it turned out, had run 2 billion years before any human was alive to build one. The physicist was Francis Perrin, working with France's Atomic Energy Commission. Natural uranium carries a very consistent amount of the isotope uranium-235, about 0.720%. The Gabonese ore measured 0.717%. That difference is minute, but for nuclear scientists it was alarming, because it meant fission had already consumed part of the fuel deep in the ground. The source was a place called Oklo, in the Franceville Basin of Gabon. Investigators eventually mapped 16 separate natural reactor zones across Oklo and 2 nearby sites. They had operated between roughly 1.7 and 2 billion years ago, in an age called the Paleoproterozoic, and they had worked for a startling reason. 2 billion years ago, uranium-235 made up about 3.7% of natural uranium, close to the level we deliberately enrich fuel to today. Groundwater seeped into the rich ore and acted as a moderator, slowing neutrons enough to sustain a chain reaction. The detail that raises the hair on your neck is the rhythm. Studies of trapped xenon gas by a scientist named Alex Mashik showed the reactors pulsed. They ran for about 30 minutes, boiled the water away, shut down for around 2.5 hours while the water returned, then fired again, cycling like a heartbeat for hundreds of thousands of years. The proof is in the isotopes. Elements like neodymium and ruthenium in the rock carry the exact fingerprints of reactor fission, not natural abundance. The deposit could only form because Earth's atmosphere had just begun to fill with oxygen, which let uranium dissolve in water and concentrate in the sediments in the first place. There is no fringe forger here to unmask, because Oklo is entirely accepted science. The ore was later mined by a French company, and much of the reactor rock has since been dug out and processed. Scientists now study what remains as a natural model for storing nuclear waste, since its fission products barely moved for 2 billion years. It even lets physicists test whether the constants of nature have changed over deep time. The hinge, if there is one, is ironic. Fringe writers have tried to claim Oklo as an artificial ancient reactor, and the real explanation is stranger than their myth. Nature ran a nuclear reactor before complex life existed, and most classrooms never mention it. Sometimes the forbidden thing is simply the truth. From a reactor in Africa, we cross the ocean to a stone in a Minnesota field. Number 9. The Kensington Runestone. In 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer near Kensington, Minnesota, was clearing land when he pulled a flat slab of stone from the roots of an aspen tree, its face carved with runes, and the runes gave a date, 1362, and told of 10 men found red with blood and dead. The farmer's name was Olaf Oman. The slab stands about 76 centimeters tall. The inscription describes a party of 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on a journey of exploration. If it were real, it would place Scandinavians deep in the interior of North America 130 years before Columbus reached the Caribbean, far from any coast. That claim landed like a bombshell. Linguists at the University of Minnesota examined it almost immediately and were skeptical. The language, they said, was wrong for 1362. It carried features of modern Swedish, patterns that looked like English influence, and a system of number runes based on 5s that did not fit the medieval period. A runologist named Erik Moltke and most Scandinavian scholars judged it a creation of the 19th century. But the case would not die, and one reason was geology. A geologist named Newton Winchell thought the weathering of the carved grooves looked genuinely old, and that gave defenders room to argue. A tireless advocate named Hjalmar Holland carried the stone around for decades, defending it. Much later, a researcher named Richard Nielsen and a geologist named Scott Wolter argued for authenticity based on how the calcite in the grooves had weathered. Other geologists called Wolter's argument inconclusive. Then a damaging detail emerged. The dotted runes on the stone match a folk runic tradition from the Dalarna region of Sweden, a tradition a 19th century immigrant like Oman could plausibly have known. Genuine Norse presence in the Americas is real, but it is confirmed at exactly one place, L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, from around the year 1000, on the coast, not the prairie. The 3 readings sit in tension. Mainstream scholarship calls the stone a 19th century hoax. Its defenders insist on a real expedition in 1362. A softer camp imagines some later medieval visit. And here is the human hinge. Even a trained geologist hesitated at those weathered grooves. Yet, whatever the verdict, the stone became civic heritage. It sits in a museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, celebrated and believed by many, which shows how identity can outweigh evidence. From carved letters we move to carved crystal, and to skulls said to carry a curse. Number 10. The Crystal Skulls. A skull of clear quartz glows on black velvet in a darkened room, its lower jaw carved as a separate hinged piece, and for decades it was sold to the world as an Aztec relic that could focus energy and even kill. This is the most famous of them, the Mitchell Hedges skull, and its story starts with a discovery that never happened. Anna Mitchell Hedges said she found the skull around 1924 at the Maya ruins of Lubantun in Belize on her birthday as a child. Her father, the adventurer F.A. Mitchell Hedges, spread tales that the skull held spiritual power and carried a curse, but the paper trail tells a different story. Records show that F.A. Mitchell Hedges actually bought the skull at a Sotheby's auction in London in 1943. The romantic discovery in the jungle collapses under a receipt. The Mitchell Hedges skull is not alone. The British Museum and the Smithsonian each held crystal skulls once believed to be pre-Columbian. Then forensic science arrived. Margaret Sachs at the British Museum and Jane Walsh at the Smithsonian studied the surfaces under scanning electron microscopes, and they found the tiny parallel scratches left by rotary cutting wheels. Pre-Columbian carvers in Mexico did not have rotary wheel technology. The tool marks pointed to 19th century European workshops. The trail even has a name at the end of it. Many of the skulls were traced to a French antiquities dealer named Eugène Bobon, who was active in the 1860s to 1880s and supplied museums with exotic pieces. The quartz itself carries inclusions that point to sources in Brazil or the Alps, not Mexico, and no crystal skull has ever been dug from a documented Maya or Aztec site. It is worth saying plainly that the curse stories are unsupported. No documented death has ever been tied to any of these objects. Popular culture kept the magic alive. The 2008 film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull revived the whole mythology, and the idea of 13 sacred skulls that must be reunited is a modern invention, not an indigenous tradition. So the readings divide. Mainstream archaeology calls them Victorian forgeries. New Age communities call them sacred and ancient. The fringe calls them lost technology. Here is the hinge. A single microscope study turned sacred Aztec relic into the product of a dealer's workshop. And notice the deeper alarm. These fakes walked straight into the greatest museums on Earth and rewrote a false ancient story for 100 years. If the gatekeepers can be fooled that long, what else is in the cases? From a carved skull sold as ancient, we go to a child's skull sold as alien. Number 11. The Starchild Skull. Held up beside an ordinary human skull, it looks wrong, broad and round, with a flattened back and shallow eye sockets. And for years it was promoted as the skull of something that was not human. It was found, the story goes, around 1930 in a mine tunnel near Copper Canyon in Chihuahua, Mexico, lying beside a normal human skeleton. It came to fame in 1999, after Ray and Melanie Young acquired it and a promoter named Lloyd Pye began presenting it to the public. Pye argued that its shape and its bone chemistry pointed to an alien, or a human-alien hybrid, and he gave it the name Starchild. Radiocarbon dating placed the skull at about 900 years old, around 1100 CE. Anatomists who examined it saw something sad and human. The broadened cranium, the thinned bone, and the altered shape are all consistent with congenital hydrocephalus, a condition in which fluid pressure reshapes a developing child's skull, or with a related developmental disorder. Early tests of the mitochondrial DNA recovered ordinary human sequences, which means the child had a human mother. Pye's team later claimed that nuclear DNA had revealed sequences that matched nothing known, but those results were never peer-reviewed and never replicated, and that is a familiar trap. Ancient DNA is fragile and easily contaminated, and degraded samples routinely produce unknown reads that vanish under careful analysis. The shallow eye sockets and the flattened back of the head are also seen in human conditions and in cultures that bound infants' heads. No professional geneticist has ever published support for a non-human origin. Pye folded the skull into a grand theory that outside forces had shaped human origins, and after his death in 2013, his foundation and followers kept promoting it. The three readings are, by now, predictable. Mainstream anatomy sees a pathological human skull. Pye saw an alien hybrid, A softer version sees an artificially deformed human child. The hinge is the suppressed DNA claim, the insistence that science is hiding a result the laboratory never actually produced. And the real cost lands hard here. A genuine, heartbreaking childhood deformity was repackaged as forbidden proof of aliens, and the human tragedy underneath was erased to sell the myth. From a single skull, we come, at last, to the most famous forbidden footprints in the world. Number 12. The Paluxy River Man Tracks. In the bed of a Texas river, where clear water slides over pale limestone, a three-toed dinosaur track and a long, human-looking footprint sit side by side, and for generations, that image has been offered as proof that people walked with dinosaurs. This is the Paluxy River, near Glen Rose, in Dinosaur Valley State Park, and it is one of the great battlegrounds of forbidden archaeology. The rock is the Glen Rose Formation, roughly 110 to 113 million years old, laid down on a Cretaceous shoreline. The genuine dinosaur tracks here are world famous, left by a large meat-eater called Acrocanthosaurus, and by enormous long-necked sauropods. In 1938, Roland Bird of the American Museum of Natural History excavated real sauropod trackways from this very riverbed. The trouble began during the Great Depression. Local people, needing money, carved and sold footprints, some human, some dinosaur. Then, in the 1970s, a film called Footprints in Stone presented elongated depressions in the rock as human tracks lying beside the dinosaurs. The claim spread through creationist circles. The natural explanation is precise. Many of the so-called human tracks are elongated metatarsal dinosaur tracks, made when a dinosaur walked with its foot flat to the ground, leaving a long, stretched impression. Others are three-toed tracks whose toe marks eroded or filled in, leaving a vague foot shape. A genuine human footprint leaves a specific pattern of pressure under the heel and the ball of the foot, and that pattern is simply absent here. A researcher named Glenn Cuban documented that many alleged human prints showed faint stain patterns, secondary infill, that traced out the real dinosaur toes hidden inside them. His work in the 1980s was so convincing that even the Institute for Creation Research withdrew the claim. The carved fakes are separate again. Loose slabs known as the Burdick and Caldwell prints show cross-sections through the rock that no real footprint would leave. So the three readings hold. Mainstream paleontology sees metatarsal dinosaur tracks and a few carvings. Young Earth writers see human prints. Skeptics see a mix of natural tracks and deliberate fakes. The hinge is Cuban's evidence. The moment a human heel resolved, under close study, back into a dinosaur's toe. This is the rare case where evidence forced a partial retraction, even inside the movement that promoted it. And yet, the image never dies. In 2022, a drought dropped the river and exposed stunning new dinosaur trackways that made headlines around the world. A reminder that the real record here is astonishing enough on its own. Step back from all 12 and a pattern comes into focus, because these discoveries share a skeleton. Every one of them is missing a documented, stratified excavation. Not one came out of the ground under a scientist's trowel with the layers recorded. They arrived through dealers, farmers, miners, and press events. They also tend to be made of materials that resist dating. Andesite and quartz and cast iron carry no easy clock. A concretion of clay can wrap a modern spark plug and look ancient. When the object itself cannot be dated, the claim cannot be cleanly killed. Again and again, the original is lost or withheld. The Coso Artifact wandered off. The Salzburg cube is gone. The Dropa Stones were never produced at all. You cannot retest what you cannot hold, and around each fake sits an authentic wrapper. Real Nazca mummies, real Cambrian trilobites, real Cretaceous trackways, real Maya ruins. The truth lends its credibility to the lie. Then comes the unpublished analysis. The Nazca DNA, the Starchild nuclear DNA, the Fuente Magna translation, all lean on results that never passed peer review. Add the confession that gets recanted, as at Ica, and a closed case springs open. Add a single striking image, the spark plug X-ray, the shoe on the trilobite, and the correction never catches up. Suppression itself becomes the story, because silence is read as a cover-up. Underneath runs a commercial engine, tourist stones, museum draws, and convention circuits that reward the mystery. And through all of it stands one true outlier, Oklo, which proves that the genuinely unbelievable gets left out of the textbooks too. The tools that would settle these cases, careful stratigraphy, isotope dating, tool mark microscopy, are exactly the tools these objects are never allowed to face. The cost is not just bad history. It is the erasure of the real people and the real science buried underneath every claim. None of this means the book is fully closed, and honesty demands the residue. A handful of the Nazca specimens' CT ambiguities remain formally unresolved in public, even as forensic work points to fabrication. Oklo is still an open frontier, constraining fundamental physics and guiding how we bury nuclear waste for the next 100,000 years. And the Paluxy riverbed keeps rewriting itself, exposing new and genuine trackways whenever the water drops. That is the real lesson hidden in a phrase like banned from the textbooks. Most of the time, it simply means already explained. The natural fracture, the misidentified spark plug, the Victorian forgery. But once in a while, it means not yet, the reactor that ran before complex life, the Norse landing at Lens aux Meadows, the strange truth of artificial cranial deformation. The way to tell the difference is not passion, but procedure, provenance, dating, publication, and replication. The scariest thing on this list, in the end, is not any single fake. It is how easily a true image can be bent into a lie, and how the truth underneath is so often stranger than the story told about it. If the deep past still has questions for you, there is another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.